Good evening. You're watching a special edition of World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Well, as we go to air tonight, European leaders, as you saw there, have just wrapped up a high-powered summit at the Élysée Palace over the future of Ukraine. We've just come out of that press conference and heard that France, Britain and Ukraine have signed a declaration of intent around the future deployment of a multinational force once a peace deal is struck in the war-torn country. Let's go straight to Paris now, where our correspondent Alex Cardier is standing by. Good evening to you, Alex. So what more do we know?
Well, good evening, Aaron. This could be an incredibly historic moment for Ukraine, for the war in Ukraine, and for the future security of that country, because we have heard from France, from the United Kingdom, first and foremost, that there will be military presence, troop boots on the ground in Ukraine. That declaration of intent from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, from Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, makes it very clear that there will be, from France and the UK, boots on the ground if a ceasefire happens. As we understand from the declaration that these 35 countries from the coalition of the willing have looked at today, there will be 3 lines of defense for Ukraine after a ceasefire. Number 1, of course, the Ukrainian armed forces, bolstered by their Western partners, by European partners. Number 2, those European forces, some on the ground. We know France and the UK have said they will be there. Others bolstering in the air and at sea, but also with military support, intelligence, and the likes. There will also be a third line, a crucial line, a line without which this probably could not have happened. That is the United States offering monitoring, surveillance of this ceasefire, monitoring for any breaches, a very, very high-tech endeavor which European powers could not quite do by themselves. The Ukrainian armed forces, European powers supporting, with the United States offering that crucial backstop. Now, the reason why I said this could be a historic day, Aaron, this reason why I said this could be historic is because it all depends on a ceasefire. All of these meetings, all of these agreements, everything that's been discussed, these 3 lines of defense are post-ceasefire. What is missing, at least in these discussions, is whether or not a ceasefire can happen. How does it happen? That is why it was crucially important that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the presidential envoys, were here, because they are now the next step. The United States is expected to have to find a way to put pressure on Russia in the way that European powers say they will continue to do to bring that ceasefire to bear. We heard from Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, earlier today. He does not think there is time for optimism. Let's have a listen to the Polish Prime Minister.
It is too early to make any positive statements. Peace requires, above all, the aggressor's willingness to end hostilities. But it is precisely in order to exert effective pressure on the Russian aggressor that a common position needs to be clarified. Europe wants it, and today the United States also declared that it wants to contribute to real security guarantees for Ukraine. And real means both the ability to deter the Russians from possibly repeating their aggression and a joint response if such an attack were to occur.
And Aaron, as I said, that really crucial detail of boots on the ground from the UK, from France. Let's listen to Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister.
We signed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future.
So, Aaron, as I said, this could be a historic day. This could be a turning point for the future security of Ukraine. What is less clear is how to end this war, how to bring about the ceasefire that would trigger all of these security guarantees, these European boots on the ground in Ukraine. For that, as we have so many times at European meetings like this, we turn to the US President Donald Trump to see if he will now put full pressure on Russia. Aaron.
Much to unpack from the Élysée Palace. Alex Cardier in Paris, thank you. And we'll break all of this down with William Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine, later in the show. But first, here's what's also making news tonight. Far from Paris, Ukrainians face the
We
grim
have 26
reality
patients
of
here,
Russia's
and
war.
the most horrible thing was that one person died, a young man. He was 30 years old.
We have our massive fleet, our armada, still present there. This is an active and ongoing U.S. government military operation.
Donald Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, says American forces are blocking the waters around Venezuela, routes used by Russia's shadow fleet. And Poland's popular parcel service InPost skyrockets on the stock exchange amid talk of a takeover. And as leaders wrap up talks in France, the reality for Ukraine is another day and night of war. From a Russian barrage on citizens in Kherson to President Volodymyr Zelensky's cabinet reshuffle, Kyiv faces a battle for momentum in ending the almost 4-year-long conflict. Paweł Trzaskowski has more.
To mark the Orthodox holiday of Epiphany, citizens of Kyiv take a traditional cold water plunge. A symbol of renewal that carries additional meaning as the country enters its 5th year of war.
Of course, it does give hope. I want the war to be finally over.
But in Paris on the same day, an epiphany of a different kind materializes.
Finally, the French, Germans and West Europeans have come to realize about the Russian threat, which the East Europeans and the Scandinavians have been talking about for a long time.
But as the coalition of the willing reaffirms its support for Kiev, overnight strikes from Russian forces continue to terrorize the citizens of Ukraine.
These drones hit our roof, broke our heating pipe, and then all the water came down. The windows were shattered, as you saw. They just crumbled. Apartments flooded.
The Russian barrage doesn't spare even medical facilities, which is evident from Monday's strike on a clinic in the capital.
In total, we had 26 patients here. And the most horrible thing was that one person died, a young man. He was 30 years old.
All the while, frontline skirmishes are reported to have intensified and the death count grows. In 2025, Russia took over only about 5 square kilometers of Ukrainian land, just 1% of the country's territory, a modest gain with a big cost.
In December, 35,000 occupiers were eliminated, and this has been confirmed with video footage. In November, there were 30,000, and in October, 26,000 eliminated occupiers. The increase in these figures is the result of making the right choices.
Additionally, a major government reshuffle took place in Kyiv, a much-needed cleansing after November's corruption scandal broke. The reshuffle is also meant to
beef up, I think, the Ukrainian diplomatic efforts and presence, PR abilities abroad, particularly in Washington and then in Brussels.
These changes include nominating Kyrylo Budanov, former head of military secret service, as head of Zelensky's office. Also, Sergei Kislytsia, Ukraine's former ambassador to the UN, was made the first deputy head of Zelensky's office. He is believed to handle foreign policy, as he is
a well-respected, seasoned diplomat, and would be the right person to run these sort of talks.
I see that happening, sure, at the right time.
After gaining some momentum, the talks have stalled again, with US attention shifting to South America. And this is why, after the Paris meeting, Ukraine hopes to have another summit by the end of January, this time in the United States.
Happy New Year to you, Mr. President, and Ukrainian people.
Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Moving to Venezuela, where Delcy Rodriguez, a former deputy to Nicolas Maduro, has been sworn in as interim president. It comes as Washington insists it remains in charge, with a Navy operation underway in the waters bordering the South American country. But that hasn't stopped ships from Russia's shadow fleet, often carrying Venezuelan oil, from spoofing and deceiving their way through the blockade. Kazimierz Słyszek reports.
As Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro is now on trial in the United States, the South American country has sworn in Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as the interim president.
I swear by our brothers and sisters who must unite as one people to bring Venezuela out of this terrible hour of threat to the stability and peace to the nation.
Rodriguez was Maduro's right-hand woman, and while the Trump administration claims it's in charge.
Quickly, who's running Venezuela right now?
The United States. Next question.
It seems to be more of a naval siege rather than actual governance.
Look, we have an oil embargo in Venezuela. For them to do any kind of commerce, they need our permission. We have our massive fleet, our armada, still present there. This is an active and ongoing U.S. government military operation. And so, of course, we set the terms and conditions.
And yet at least 16 tankers from the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet, meaning ships using legal loopholes to circumvent Western sanctions, managed to run through the blockade last weekend. Some of them were caught on satellite pictures.
The Navy can choose to pursue them. Some of these tankers are not subject to sanctions that would allow the U.S. to seize them without with a warrant extraterritorially. So the U.S. is going to figure out how they can legally seize some of these tankers.
The tankers have managed to escape using a strategy often referred to as spoofing, meaning switching off transponders to conceal the location. But the deception doesn't end there.
Some of these other vessels were actually engaged in a different form of deception where they take a telephone communications code, a MIMSI, from a different vessel and pretend to be that vessel instead. And so that's kind of what these vessels were doing to stay off of at least publicly available information sources.
While President Trump has been pushing for normalizing relations with Russia, the strike on Putin's ally in South America and the moves against the Shadow Fleet are now putting that relationship into question. But it's also raising questions about international law.
It is clear that the operation undermined a fundamental principle of international law, that states must not threaten or use force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state.
And as pointed out by some analysts, feeding into Russia's narrative on its war in Ukraine.
The fact that the U.S. has sort of undermined its own talk for years about non-intervention into other countries' sovereignty, respecting other borders, respecting sovereignty of other nations, which of course Putin did not do.
For TVP World, Kazimierz Słyszek.
A market boost for popular Polish parcel service InPost. The logistics company, which delivers mail to self-service lockers, has seen its shares skyrocket after news of a mooted multi-billion euro takeover bid. So who's behind it? And could this Polish invention really be sold? Sonia Gata-Biszczan explains.
2026 is off to a good start for InPost. The parcel locker company founded by Poland's Rafał Brzoska had its shares jump from the previous closest 11.59 to over 14.80 euro on Tuesday. By the afternoon, there was a rise of roughly 28% in share prices caused by the following news.
InPost announces that it has received an indicative proposal regarding a potential acquisition of all shares in the company.
Details regarding the buyer and the price have not been revealed. The company added that there is no assurance the offer will lead to a transaction, but in the view of some analysts, the very prospect of interest is enough to entice the market.
The increase in share prices is due to hopes for an attractive proposal in the future, rather than a confirmed decision. Whether higher share prices are maintained will depend on whether specific, binding announcements are made by the company.
InPost announced a special committee of supervisory and management board members has been formed and will consider all aspects of a potential transaction. At present, InPost's market capitalization amounts to 5.79 billion euro, and its biggest shareholders include the PPF Group, a Czech investment giant, Rafał Brzoska's A&R Investments Limited, and the Advent International Corporation, with the latter possibly spearheading the multi-billion euro takeover bid, according to Sky News. Advent declined to comment on the speculation for TVP World, but it is suspected that the private equity firm is part of a consortium aiming to acquire InPost. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gata-Biszczan.
You might think a picturesque Yemeni island in the Indian Ocean is an ideal holiday destination. But for hundreds of tourists, including Poles, that trip of a lifetime has fast turned into a crisis and repatriation amid re-escalating tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Natalia Komarov reports.
Socotra, a picturesque island in the Indian Ocean that might seem like the perfect vacation destination. But it belongs to Yemen, which has been engulfed in an 11-year civil war. And due to a recent spike in fighting, Socotra has introduced a state of emergency, effectively closing its airport. The closure has resulted in hundreds of tourists trapped on the island.
Unfortunately, we unwittingly stumbled upon this ongoing geopolitical issue, and it's now been affecting us for a few days.
If it is a delay of 1 day, 2 days, you can accept it. But now it's becoming a problem for all of us because we must go back to work.
The Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs managed to organize an evacuation with the help of Yemenia Airways.
Yes, we have been notified by our embassy in Saudi Arabia. On January 7th, an airline will facilitate a flight from Socotra to Jeddah. The Poles will be able to return home safely.
Amid an intensification of armed conflicts worldwide, the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs has had to rescue Polish citizens multiple times in recent years.
In case of military operations, stay home, avoid big gatherings, and stay in touch with our diplomatic missions.
Polish travelers are advised to register with the Odysseus system, which allows the ministry to contact them in case of emergency. And all travelers are advised to avoid vacationing in war-torn countries. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And joining me now for an exclusive interview is William Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very well. I hope you are too. Let's start with what we're hearing out of Paris. A big night at the Élysée Palace. A European-led force to deliver reassurance in the air, at sea, on land. Of course, of those member states already giving their commitment to that are France and the UK. We're also hearing these reports of US-backed intelligence and logistics. Do you read this as a breakthrough tonight or just another summit declaration?
It's a strong statement. It's a strong statement of intent. These European nations have gotten together and have committed themselves to a serious effort to provide security for Ukraine after a ceasefire. And these commitments by the British and the French to actually put troops on the ground in Ukraine is a big statement, is a big step. Other nations, I understand, are also considering doing that as well. There's some Baltic states that are willing to put troops on the ground as well. So this is a major step towards security for Ukraine after a ceasefire.
How significant is that multinational force agreement that was signed tonight between France, Britain and Ukraine? This idea that France and the UK are saying, yes, once there is a ceasefire, as you say, we will have troops on the ground.
I think it's a very big deal. It's a message for Ukrainians in the first instance, that they can count on the support of the Europeans to help them secure themselves so that they can deter another Russian invasion. That's the key. How to keep the Russians from invading again, and troops on the ground from the Brits and the French and others will certainly do that. Putin knows that these are strong members of NATO, and that an attack on Britain or France in Ukraine would be a major mistake by Putin. So this is a big decision and demonstration, as I say, for the Ukrainians, but also a message to Putin. Do not consider invading again.
We've heard America's Steve Witkoff tonight talk about durable security guarantees, agreeing with the coalition that robust prosperity commitments are essential to a lasting peace in Ukraine. There have also, of course, been some reports that America has agreed to support any defence force when it comes to a potential Russian attack in the future. Do you believe that Washington would put its own soldiers at risk and deploy to Ukraine?
I do. If that's the commitment, I think the Americans understand the importance of Ukraine standing up to Russia, the importance of the United States standing with the Brits and the French and the Ukrainians and others to defend, and they understand the importance of the U.S. participation in this deterrent force. Again, Aaron, this is a deterrent force. This is to deter the Russians from invading again, and the American contribution is going to be important to that.
You raise a really good point, because I guess the question is, would Moscow take any guarantees seriously if American troops were not on the ground?
They probably will. They certainly take it seriously in the NATO context. The Russians have never attacked a NATO nation. They have attacked they've attacked Georgia and Ukraine. They have troops in Moldova.
Is that, Mr. Ambassador, because of America's strength?
It is. They understand that the Americans back up NATO, and if the Americans have now committed, as you heard Steve Witkoff say, that they're committed to supporting this coalition of the willing, that's a deterrent for the Russians.
When it comes to Poland, Warsaw has repeatedly ruled out sending any troops, talking about the fact that Poland has a contribution when it comes to logistics, when it comes to being a leader as that logistics hub for Kyiv. Is that a mistake, though, for Poland not to send troops to Ukraine?
This is a decision for the Polish government and the Polish people to make. This is not for others. Every one of those nations of the coalition of the willing, including Poland, will decide how to contribute, what to contribute, where to contribute. And this is an important decision that each government will have to make. Of course, Poland has its own defense to be concerned about, and everyone understands that. The Brits and the French don't have a border with the Russians, so they can put forces in. Others, like the Baltic states, do have borders with the Russians. They're putting forces in. So that's what I say. It's up to each individual nation to make that decision.
Of course, despite all this talk tonight of security guarantees, it all comes after a ceasefire, right? So is this going cart before the horse a little bit? I mean, are we any closer in your mind to actually ending the fighting?
Ending the fighting depends, as you've indicated, as your reporters indicated, depends on Putin. Putin has to understand that he can't win this war. Putin has to understand that the Ukrainians will continue to fight and defend themselves. He now understands that the Europeans are ready to put troops on the ground and other ways to provide the support to Ukraine for its security. Putin now understands that the Americans are backing that. So that's the message to Putin. You need to realize, Putin, that you're not going to win, that this is a disaster for you to continue. That pressure on Putin is what it's going to take to get to a ceasefire.
You mentioned there that Vladimir Putin will now know that America backs Ukraine. There's been a lot of toing and froing over the last year. President Trump obviously sitting down with Vladimir Putin himself. Can Europe be confident that America, that Washington, that Donald Trump backs Ukraine right now?
I think Europeans and Ukrainians are probably taking a dual track on this, Aaron. They are counting on the Americans to do what they're saying, that the Americans are saying what Steve Witkoff said in Paris tonight, that is, we're going to be there. And they're counting on that. And President Trump has said, we're going to be there. We're going to support NATO. We're going to support Article 5, he has said. So the Europeans and Ukrainians are counting on that support continuing. But they recognize that that's not going to be there forever. The Americans are not going to be there in Europe in the same strength and same commitment forever. It's going to increasingly fall to Europeans, including Ukrainians, to defend themselves. So the dual track is work with the Americans as long as they're in, but start building up, as they've already begun doing seriously, build up strength, military industrial strength, build up the capabilities to defend Europe more and more on their own. They're doing both at the same time.
I want to explicitly draw on your previous experience as US ambassador to Ukraine. If we had Donald Trump sitting with us here tonight, what would you tell him about trying to get this war to an end?
I would say, Mr. President, if you want to end this war, as you have said over and over that you do, and Steve Witkoff just said it again today, if you want to end it, the way to do it is to put pressure on Putin. And you, Mr. President, you, President Trump, have the leverage, the capability to put pressure on Trump, probably like no one else, Don't shake his hand. What you should do is put pressure on him in terms of military and in terms of economic. Choke off the flow of money to that man. Choke off the flow of funds that man, Putin, gets from selling oil and gas around the world. Choke that off. He will not be able to continue this war. And then, Mr. President, you will get what you're after. You will get this prize for ending this war by making Putin understand he cannot win.
Speaking of Donald Trump, you were quoted last year as saying the strongest security guarantee for Ukraine is NATO membership. I'm interested in your view on that tonight. Does that still stand? Because some argue that we're seeing the US president, with his Monroe push towards this Western Hemisphere dominance, effectively shatter the alliance, or at the very least threaten to shatter that alliance.
The alliance is not shattered, Aaron, as you know. The alliance is not even threatening to be shattered. What you see from the United States is today, a focus on Latin America. Today, a focus on Venezuela. Today, a focus on the Western Hemisphere. But there is a long tradition, including this administration, of focusing on Europe. It can do two things at once. It can do three things at once. It can focus on Europe. It keeps its eye on China. And it can focus on the Latin American countries that we're in today. So it is certainly possible to do, but NATO will continue to exist, continue to defend Europe. And the United States, as I say, even this President Trump, has indicated that he supports NATO. That will continue. And yes, I do stand by. I think the best security guarantee for Ukraine is NATO. It is the most trusted. It is the most tested. It's the most trained. It's the most capable. It's the most credible threat to the Russians if they were to invade. So I think at some time in the future, Ukraine will be in NATO. It's not going to happen soon. Not going to happen tomorrow. Not even next year. But sometime, yes, I believe Ukraine will be in NATO.
So very briefly, because we're running out of time, but so you still believe NATO membership, or indeed those NATO-style security guarantees that we've heard about when it comes to Ukraine as well, that they are still enough for Vladimir Putin to sit up in the Kremlin, to take notice, and of course to, above all, stay away?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I believe that, Aaron. That Article 5 commitment that all NATO nations make to all other NATO nations is strong. It's been tested. It is credible. And so nothing that is going on right now would challenge that. NATO is there. It's going to defend, and Putin knows it.
William Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine, thank you very much for joining us on a big night here on TVP World.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World as this story develops. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.